I got laid off today. I moved across the country for this job. I was promoted last month, and now I have no income. Those 4 sentences used to be shocking. They are not anymore. Across the United States, people are losing jobs, not because their companies are failing, but because the rules of employment have fundamentally changed. And the most dangerous part of what is happening right now is not the layoffs themselves. It is that the official story about the job market does not match what millions of people are actually experiencing. This is part of our Collapse series. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the job market feels so broken, why performance no longer protects you, why loyalty no longer insures you, and why the assumptions most people are still making about their careers are built on a foundation that no longer exists. Stay with me. Part 1. Layoffs are no longer a warning sign. For most of modern economic history, a layoff announcement meant something specific. Revenue was falling, demand was weakening, leadership had made serious mistakes. Letting people go was framed as a painful last resort, something companies did only after every other option had been exhausted. That meaning has been completely rewritten. Today, layoffs are not responses to crisis. They are deliberate business decisions made by companies that are still profitable, still generating cash, and still meeting or exceeding investor expectations. Nothing is broken. The business is simply being optimized for a specific set of financial metrics. The evidence is not subtle. Amazon eliminated roughly 16,000 corporate roles while continuing to post strong financial results. UPS announced plans to cut around 30,000 positions as part of a broader efficiency initiative. These were not companies fighting for survival. They were responding to a set of incentives built into modern corporate finance. Incentives that reward cutting labor and punish holding on to it. Labor is one of the largest controllable costs. For most organizations, cutting headcount produces immediate results. Expenses drop, margins improve, earnings look stronger in the next quarterly report. Markets often reward these moves almost instantly. Compared to long-term investments in training, research, or expansion, layoffs are fast, visible, and easy to explain to shareholders. The calculus has shifted entirely. What makes this more dangerous is how normal it has become. When a single company announces layoffs, it attracts criticism. When dozens of companies do it simultaneously, the reaction softens. Job cuts begin to feel unavoidable rather than preventable. They get reframed as prudent management instead of failure. And once that normalization takes hold, executives stop debating whether layoffs are necessary. They focus on timing, scale, and frequency. Headcount becomes a variable to adjust whenever financial pressure appears, even when the underlying business is perfectly healthy. For workers, this creates a new kind of permanent instability. Performance reviews lose their meaning as protection. Loyalty stops functioning as insurance. Entire teams can be eliminated, even after hitting every target and delivering results. Job security becomes detached from individual contribution and tied instead to spreadsheet calculations, made far from the work itself. Part 2. AI is the excuse, not the reason. Artificial intelligence is now the most common explanation given for layoffs. Companies point to automation and efficiency gains as evidence that fewer workers are needed. In public statements and earnings calls, AI is framed as an inevitable force that makes workforce reductions unavoidable. This explanation sounds convincing. It is also incomplete. AI is not eliminating jobs at the scale the narrative suggests. What it is doing is providing a socially acceptable justification for decisions that are primarily financial. Saying a role was removed because of efficiency sounds neutral and forward-looking. Saying it was removed to cut costs and boost quarterly earnings does not. The framing matters, and companies have learned to use it. 3 forces are operating behind the AI narrative that rarely make it into the official explanation. The first is margin pressure. Even companies with healthy revenues face constant demand to improve profitability. Reducing headcount is one of the fastest ways to move that number. AI allows companies to demand more output from fewer people while presenting the decision as innovation rather than austerity. The second force is offshoring. Many roles are not disappearing, they are being relocated. Work that once paid a middle-class salary in the United States is increasingly handled in lower-cost regions. AI becomes the headline explanation, while global labor substitution happens quietly in the background. The third force is role consolidation. Instead of hiring specialists, companies merge responsibilities. One person is expected to perform work that previously belonged to 2 or 3 roles. Productivity metrics may rise, but workload and stress rise with them. The most damaging long-term consequence is the disappearance of entry-level positions. companies choose automation and short-term efficiency over training new workers. This breaks the pipeline that turns beginners into experienced professionals. Experience cannot be automated. It has to be built gradually, 1 year at a time. By removing the first rung of that ladder, companies are weakening the future workforce they will eventually depend on, creating a skills gap that will take a decade to fill, but a generation to fix. Part 3. What the data is hiding. From a distance, the job market appears steady. Headlines talk about resilience and gradual adjustment. Monthly reports suggest that jobs are still being added and unemployment remains contained. That impression changes when the numbers are placed in context. In December, the US economy added roughly 50,000 jobs. Taken alone, that does not sound alarming. But over the entire year, total job growth amounted to only about 584,000 positions. That works out to roughly 50,000 per month. A dramatic slowdown. Compared to prior years, when monthly gains were 2 or 3 times higher, the labor market is still moving. But at a crawl, more revealing than the headline numbers are the revisions. Initial reports consistently paint a softer picture than what the data eventually shows. In October, early data suggested job losses of about 105,000. That number was later revised to approximately 173,000. This was not a minor adjustment. It was a significantly weaker labor market than the original report indicated, and by the time the correction was published, public attention had already moved on. The data captures payroll changes, but it misses something harder to quantify: hesitation. It counts jobs created, but not how long people remain unemployed after losing one. It does not reflect how often interviews get cancelled, how frequently offers disappear without explanation, or how many people stop searching altogether because the process has become too exhausting. This gap between numbers and lived experience is why so many workers feel disconnected from official optimism. The market is not collapsing suddenly, it is tightening slowly, unevenly, in ways that the monthly jobs report was never designed to capture. Part 4. The two groups getting trapped. The pressure created by this labor market does not hit everyone the same way. Two groups are absorbing the most damage, and they represent opposite ends of the career spectrum. For new graduates, the traditional entry point into the job market has quietly collapsed. The expectation for decades was straightforward: complete your education, apply for junior roles, gain experience, move forward. That first step is now missing for a large portion of graduates. Unemployment among recent college graduates has risen to levels not seen outside of the pandemic period. At the same time, job postings labeled as entry-level frequently demand multiple years of experience, specialized tools, or industry knowledge that can only be acquired by already having a job. This contradiction leaves new graduates stuck in a loop, with no way out. Career fairs reveal this in real time. Students stand in line, speak with recruiters, and are told to apply online. Many companies attend without actively hiring. Internships, once a reliable bridge into full-time employment, are fewer and more competitive. Training programs are being cut because they are treated as costs rather than investments. And underneath all of this sits DEBT. Graduates leave school with financial obligations, but no immediate path to income. Missing early experience does not just delay a career, it lowers lifetime earnings, reduces advancement opportunities, and forces many people into roles completely unrelated to their education, simply to survive financially. Mid-career professionals face a different kind of squeeze. These are workers who followed the rules. They gained experience, built reputations, stayed loyal. Their identity became closely tied to their work. When layoffs hit at this stage, the impact goes far beyond a temporary loss of income. Job searches at mid-career levels are taking longer and becoming more demoralizing. People apply to hundreds of positions and hear nothing. Interviews stretch across months and end without explanation. Roles get cancelled midway through the process or quietly reposted at significantly lower pay. Many discover that their years of experience no longer command the compensation or security it once did. What connects these two groups is not a lack of effort or talent. It is a structural problem. Too many qualified people competing for too few stable roles. This is not a motivation crisis. It is a capacity crisis. And reframing it correctly is the first step toward navigating it. Part 5. Loyalty is dead. Measurement replaced it. For a long time, loyalty was presented as a form of protection. Stay with a company, work hard, sacrifice when needed, and stability would follow. Many people built their careers and personal lives around that assumption. That model no longer operates the way it once did. Loyalty has been replaced by measurement. Productivity dashboards, activity trackers, performance scores, and internal metrics now define value in ways that traditional commitment never could. These tools are often introduced as ways to improve transparency or support professional growth. In practice, they function as control systems. They quantify output, compare employees against one another, and create documentation that can justify future decisions, including terminations. One metric in particular has gained enormous influence: revenue per employee. It reduces the entire workforce to a single ratio. How much money does each worker generate? Companies with higher ratios are praised for efficiency. Companies with lower ratios face pressure to cut headcount or push remaining employees to produce more. Once this logic takes hold, behavior changes quickly. Hiring slows. Teams are kept deliberately understaffed, even as workloads grow. Training is minimized because it reduces short-term output. Employees are expected to perform at full capacity immediately, with almost no adjustment period. In this environment, loyalty offers almost nothing. Years of service do not protect a role if it no longer fits a target number. Strong performance reviews do not prevent elimination if a department is being restructured. Decisions get made based on aggregated financial data, rather than individual contribution. For workers, this creates a state of constant self-monitoring, tracking their own output carefully, avoiding risks that could affect performance metrics, overextending themselves just to remain visible. Collaboration becomes cautious. Trust erodes quietly. Work stops feeling like a long-term partnership and starts feeling like a short-term transaction where the terms can change at any time without notice. Payoff plus closing. It is tempting to believe that what is happening right now is temporary, that once interest rates fall or growth returns, hiring will rebound and stability will follow. That belief rests on one assumption, that this is a cycle. It is not. Layoffs have proven highly effective in the short term. They reduce costs immediately. Margins improve. Shareholders respond favorably. Executives get praised for discipline. And because similar moves are happening across entire industries simultaneously, there is almost no short-term penalty for doing it. Once companies experience that outcome, expectations shift permanently. Investors begin to assume leaner operations as the baseline. Management teams internalize the lesson. What once felt like an extreme measure becomes standard practice, and then it spreads. Not because demand requires it, but because no company wants to look inefficient by comparison. For workers, this creates a form of instability that is harder to recognize than a traditional recession. Many people are employed, but constantly anxious. They stay in jobs they dislike because alternatives feel scarce. They postpone major life decisions because income feels uncertain. The fear is not of sudden collapse. It is of slow erosion, the quiet narrowing of options over time. Understanding what is actually driving this matters more than waiting for it to reverse on its own. Loyalty does not protect anymore. Performance does not guarantee security. The rules have changed, and the people who see those changes clearly, rather than operating on assumptions that no longer hold, are the ones best positioned to make decisions that still work in this environment. The job market is not broken in obvious ways. It is broken in structural ones, and structural problems do not fix themselves when the headlines change. If this video opened your eyes to what is actually happening behind the numbers, hit subscribe. Because every week, we break down the economic forces that are reshaping work, income, and financial security for people in your income range. Not the version for millionaires, not the version for people who have already given up, the version for people who are still in the game and want to stay ahead of what is coming. And right now, in the comments below, tell me this: are you currently employed, job searching, or somewhere in between? Because the experience on the ground tells a very different story than what the official data reports. And that story matters. Drop it below. I read every single one. The next video in this series is already on your screen. And if you thought this was the part nobody is talking about, wait until you see what the data shows about where this is heading next. I will see you there.